Hi everyone, welcome back to Kids Eat Toast Sometimes. Today I've got a member, or the first member of South Africa's Church of Scientology and fashion designer Gareth Peters. Gareth, how are you doing, my friend? How's lockdown?
What's happening, Sam? Yeah, surviving. I've been kept busy with varsity work, as many people have. But yeah, I guess as much as you can do to survive.
For sure, and I briefly mentioned it there. I mean, you're a member of the Scientology Church, but you're also studying at Fedisa. What's that been like? Dealing with the two crossovers.
It's difficult to like to keep your Scientology life separate from fashion. But I've managed to do it up until this point. So.
Scientology is fashion, if you will. So, but no, how has the creative process been in lockdown? Because I've found it quite, in some moments, it's quite exciting and you feel all these surges of inspiration, and then other days you walk around in your underwear for its entirety. So, where have you found the balance? Have you found the balance?
Yeah, and I think that is like the key to it. You don't necessarily need to strive to have like a regimented like balance or even like a schedule. You can, and especially when it comes to creativity, it's like you look for inspiration in so many different things, and the usual things that give you inspiration, your usual sources are like no longer there. So I definitely struggle to some extent. I've missed like the environment. I've missed the outside. And like as an extroverted person, I feed off those like social interactions. That's where I get a lot of my inspiration from.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. That's a great answer. I think sometimes we take for granted how fantastic our own creativity is, and forget that a large amount of the inspiration or the source of it is other people and social interactions. But I'm glad we've touched on this already because you're at Fedisa, obviously doing your thing, studying fashion, existing in the creative economy. What I've always found interesting with fashion designers and this sort of field is what is the process for you? How does that come about? Where do you start? I'm just interested in having a brief view into your world.
No, no, it's like and I think it is different for every designer. You can't ever apply the same process to a single collection to a form design. It's going to be different for everyone. um I like to plug Pinterest. First and foremostly, I had some sort of like hesitations about Pinterest, but Pinterest is like one of the most powerful like assets for creators, in my opinion. There's nothing better. And like, yeah, I just think so. You need to take the tools at your disposal, Pinterest obviously being one of them, and find like a process that works for you, and then find like a hybrid of those two.
Sorry, I don't know what that notification was. Anyway, for sure. And then what's the next step from there? Because I completely understand that you can't have this static, regimented approach to everything. But do you move across to Illustrator? Are you on Photoshop? What's your modus operandi in that regard?
So you, sorry for interrupting you there. You like a little bit more of like the step-by-step process in developing, would you like in developing a garment or a concept?
Yeah, well, like from concept to garments, what are your steps? Because I feel everyone once has this idea of designing fashion and being in fashion, but no one really actually knows what goes into it, I don't think.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's like it's definitely somewhat romanticized. The best way to describe it would be like as a whole collection, because then there's a couple of garments there where like the motive is like spread across like the across collection, so you can see like ideas repeating. And then so basically, if you want say like 5 looks, 3 looks, or whatever, for each look you would sketch up um like a main idea with like a couple of variations of that idea. So you'd first go to like sketching, and then once you've sketched out your ideas, those three, you'd like pick one that's like that you like, yeah, you're attracted to the most. And then obviously if there's elements from other ones that you enjoy, you can bring those over and like add those into like the designs. And then once you've settled on your final designs, after like, yeah, that process, then you'd put it into Illustrator and then trace you can like really just take a picture or do anything and then trace those images into like a digital format. And then from there going forward, you would like render it, which means like, coloring it in, basically adding like light, and creating what's called a fashion figure. And so these are like somewhat like stylized to look a lot like, it's like a somewhat toxic image of what a model should look like, because body acceptance is quite a big thing. It's really in like runway fashion shows, it's only one body type, and that's really it. But then, yeah, so you create this fashion figure, and then once you've got your fashion figure with the full look of what the garment would look like on like a person, you need to like get technical drawings, and these are like the specific dimensions, like trimmings, opens, like buttons, cuffs, and these things. This ideally would be given to like a CMT, which stands for cut, make, trim, and these are the people that would produce your garment on a mass scale. But it's basically like the blueprint of your garment, and so like anyone, you could give this to any other fashion person and they would be able to understand what you're making and the dimensions of this garment. And then once you have your technical drawing, you need to draft what's called a pattern. And a pattern is basically the puzzle pieces, stencils of constructing a garment. So this is where you use your technical drawing and you relay back to your technical drawing, and to make sure that you're transferring this 2D image into like a 3D structure.
Sure.
And so that takes can prove quite difficult, because it's like perceiving space. And then once you've drafted your pattern, that's when you can start cutting your material and construct your garment.
Sure. Quite the process. Quite the process indeed.
Yeah, that is for one piece of like clothing. So that's for a pair of pants, and then obviously you'd need to repeat that 3 times for like the shirt and the jacket that like goes with that pair of pants, if you're making a 3-piece like suit or something.
Sure. No, I mean, that was brilliantly broken down because, like you said earlier, I think the process is overly romanticized in the creative arts, especially. And there is a tremendous amount of work that goes into producing a t-shirt, a pair of pants, or even a whole collection, which is what you'll be doing at Fedisa. And it's also interesting to me because it's almost like an intersection of architecture in terms of the technical drawings and engineering in that regard, and a very humanities-based approach to constructing an idea, a theme, exploring the subdivisions of that theme. So that's that's very very interesting. So thanks for that, G. And then where would you say you go, or not go from there, but how much of your identity goes into this process? Because identity is massive. Identity politics is a massive talking point at the moment. How much of you goes into the design and the process and all of that? And can you kind of distinguish between the Gareth we see on the street, or the Gareth that I'm a friend of, and Gareth the designer? Is there a distinction, or is it more of an intersection like most things in this world?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to separate the art from the artist. Although people preach about doing that, I can be like quite uncompromising in my designs, in the belief that, because I feel like fashion is that type of process where it's a platform, and it's very like self-expressive. It's one of the first like impressions you can give as a person. And so I always believed that you had to like 100% express yourself through the way you dress and the clothes you make. But like being in like a more of a structured environment, I've definitely learned that following a brief is very, very important. And that's really what you're going to be faced with within the industry, is clients that want specific things and certain things. And so you're going to, at certain times, you're going to have to compromise what you believe and what your ideals in making clothes and fashion is for a client or someone else. And I think that being like uncompromising in what you make is important, but being able to meet like to compromise at some point, to be compromising, is also
Mm.
like an important skill to have.
Well, I mean that's an issue. I think any person who creates a market good or something that's going to be sold or a commodity is going to face it. It's that distinction or a line that's going to be drawn between what you're doing and what's required by, like you said, a brief or a company. But I do think there is a great need for that balance, like you briefly spoke about, because it's an age-old issue of that yin and yang, order and chaos, and you need order, but you absolutely need the chaos as well. So it's very exciting, and I've loved being a part of your small little process and viewing it from time to time. So that's been great. A big question I did have for you as well was, where do you see the future of fashion? Because you read an article like Zara is closing down 1,200 stores. How does that make you feel as a young designer, someone who's essentially about to start paving their way in this industry?
I think it's very easy, and like the negative points are like are written on the wall. You know, it's difficult to like to avoid those on a day-to-day basis. But like I definitely um see the opportunity as a young person coming out of university at this point, going to like a slightly different world. So you're in somewhat like a blazer, as you're able to move against the toxic practices like of the fashion industry at the moment, and move towards issues that are like more dear to heart, such as sustainability and like consumption of fashion.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because it's a big point, and I absolutely love how you frame this in like a silver linings playbook. Because on the one hand, yes, Zara closing down all those stores is like, oh my God, no one's gonna buy clothes ever again. But the reality is, as an independent or as someone who'd operate in a smaller capacity, there, like you said, are such fantastic opportunities to influence the fashion world and the fashion market, the younger market that's moving through that is concerned with sustainability, staying away from fast fashion, all those sort of common tropes that exist today. Which also leads me to my next question. Do you think this sustainable fashion trend, if I'll call it that, is here to stay, or is it something a bit, like a black square and that trends on Instagram for a day and then everyone goes back to their practices? Because my big issue with something, and we'll use Zara as the example, Zara came out and there were like all these child labor practice accusations, and people were stitching messages into Zara clothing, and everyone was like, "Ah, that's terrible! I'll never buy." And then like they had a sale, you're like, "Oh, those jeans!" and then yeah. So where do you think we're heading? I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that a lot of the toxic practices that have developed in the fashion industry, as well as others, the products of capitalism that have really like created like negative processes within the industry, have like you can there's an opportunity to move in a different direction from the what has like plagued us up until this point. And so like I really believe that like sustainability in fashion, although it is like somewhat trendy, it does come from like a genuine place, a genuine sentiment that like a lot of the young people like fully believe, or not, and not necessarily believe, but they live it and can like and get behind it. It's something that's a genuine cause to them. And so I really think sustainability, and not necessarily like changing all the practices in which we participate in fashion, but really just ensuring that it's sustainability in the truest nature, and that we can continue like the practices that we have going forward, like unhindered.
Yeah, I love how you've redefined it as a silver linings and all that sort of stuff. And I do think there is a rise in ethical consumption. But how does that, in real terms, affect your practice?
And yeah, it's I really think it begins with like each one of us individually and looking at how we approach the world, because like I mentioned before, the practice of capitalism has reared so many ugly heads. One of them being like convenience, and convenience is currently plagues like the fashion industry from top to bottom. And so that's why consumption has to be through like, secondhand stores and your parents, and sourcing clothes in a manner that doesn't support like the companies that are promoting fast fashion, and
Sure.
and putting.
I think I probably phrased my question incorrectly there. I was more, and I agree with what you've said, but I was more concerned with ethical production rather, as you as a young creative and designer. How does that, what does that mean to you, or how does that come about in your design process?
And yeah, and I think a lot of the points that I made previously does like fit in as well. It has to be um um uh, a concerted effort. You have to really be, as corny as it sounds, you have to be the change that you want to see.
Mm.
And so creating brands that are based upon upcycling is a massive trend, but for like a completely valid reason, like recreating like garments out of like fabric that's like unmistakably another thing, and giving it a new life and a story is a very valuable topic, and it could be something that one would be interested in getting into.
Sure. No, I like that. So I think for me, if I were to approach the topic, I mean, there was the failed Your Homie Homes venture due to pending lawsuit, but I think that the approach has to be, if you're going to make fashion, is that it has to be done ethically. In terms of the base wage that you're paying CMTs or other employees has to, reach a certain level of respect and actual income, and then as well as sourcing fabrics, like you've mentioned, either if you're recycling garments or if you're doing so in an environmentally sustainable fashion. I've just thrown that out. I don't really know how that would go about, but that's how the majority of conversations work. You just say things that you don't really know. But I think it's a very interesting point and point of departure that I think young people will get behind. And it also it makes me think of something completely left of field, and that's ethical consumption when it comes to pornography. Because, and I know it's like, wow, what is this guy going on about? But I read an article recently that started calling for readers and viewers, I suppose, to stop consuming online content at Pornhub because it's misogynistic, it's got racist and racialized tendencies. And I thought, wow, that was very a very interesting point and something I'd never considered before because I've done some research on Pornhub. Recreational and otherwise, so it kind of stopped me in my tracks. What's your sort of reaction when you hear about an article like that?
Yeah, it sounds like a little bit of a witch hunt. I think the when it comes to ethical consumption, there's definitely like aspects that are just as damaging. But yeah, it's, I guess, towards gender-based violence, it could contribute significantly and
Mm.
be like quite damaging, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think there might be an aspect of a witch hunt, but it's also it's that whole philosophy of like sorting, making sure your house is in order before you go out into the world. So if we live in a free world, free markets, all that sort of stuff. A product could be produced. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be consumed. And I think when you start moving into censoring certain products or viewership, and what Pornhub is creating. Of course, if it's racist and overtly racist and misogynistic, or racist and misogynistic in any way, it should be reviewed. But it starts to become that very dangerous, like, who is the editor of the world now? And I think the response is rather to educate yourself, your friend group, so that when you are faced with a situation like ethically consuming pornography, you watch it or you don't watch the video and you go, wow, that was wrong. I can't ever endorse this product again, or I can't. And then, so you fix yourself and then you fix the world. I think that's a much better approach to most societal issues, opposed to just, people speak about the abstract economy and like abstract society, and like, society's broken. And like, no, society's broken because it's composed of all these broken people. And obviously, arguments of cause and effect come into being. But yeah, that's me going off on a bit of a tangent.
It is about like responsible consumption, consumption where you have access to this and you can enjoy it if you want to, but you need to, like everything in this world, and especially in the age of the internet, you have to be extremely critical of everything you see, and so you can consume this, whatever you choose to consume, but you have to be asking questions along with it. It's like, why was this produced? Why am I this?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's so interesting. And maybe I have like watched one Ben Shapiro video too many, or I don't know. I don't agree with the majority of what he says, but I like the way he presents a counter argument, in terms of there is a very liberal left sort of narrative that is being pushed in society, and it almost feels like if you're not on board with that, it's important to have contesting views and ideologies. But let's move off. This is a bit heavy. I'm going to move away from it very quickly and more speak about your journey into fashion, because that in itself is very interesting, because you were at UCT doing a BSc in Scientology and astrophysics, or whatever nonsense you were doing there, and then you've obviously transitioned to Fedisa. But the story in itself is interesting, and I'd love to hear it again.
No, it was. I definitely think like many people in university, it's definitely like a coming of age period, because you have no idea like what you want to do or what your interests are coming out of school. And funnily enough, I decided to do BSc like by actually working backwards through the things that I didn't want to study. So I knew I didn't want to study this, and I knew I didn't want to study this, and I think I was left with science and engineering, and I wasn't like keen to go to study like civil engineering, and so BSc was my choice. And then the situation was further exacerbated by the fact that like I still didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just took a very, very general BSc and ended up doing like all the base courses that were like heavy subjects, and just worsened my time at UCT. And so like I guess it happens for a reason, because it took me to a place where I knew that like I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew for sure it wasn't what I was doing. And only like when you've been like dejected and like broken down to that point, you can really like reassess what you want and like what you enjoy.
Sure.
And so through all of that, fashion and clothing, like the development and relationship with clothing grew, and I soon realized that it was, I wouldn't say as much as being a crutch, but it was definitely something that I relied heavily on, and it was something that like I enjoyed. And it was the one thing that was like constant. So like being quite like, I wouldn't say eclectic, but you go through like phases of like obsessing over certain things, over like if it's cooking or like gardening or whatever. But like through all of it, fashion was like fairly consistent.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's a internal process that you go through, and I think, like you mentioned, you worked backwards in terms of things that you didn't want to do. And I think so many people, I've done it, and a lot of young people around us do it, instead of like blatantly just going out and pursuing, and rather like working forward to stuff you want to do. And I found it very interesting that you're playing around with a BSc. I don't think I've ever met a maniac who's playing around with a BSc and like science and astrophysics and the like. I mean, you play around with a BA, that you just keep it there, you know. But so how did the transition work? Did you abruptly stop the degree? Did you just switch over straight to Fedisa? Because I know your parents at times can be a bit conservative. So how did you find that balance?
And yeah, that was part of the reason like that I went into a BSc, is because coming from like an Indian family, it's like somewhat expected of you. And so you can imagine like the reactions I got from my parents when I told them that like I want to switch over to something as like left field as fashion. Um, the so like I started off by doing some research like into the various fashion schools around Cape Town and Johannesburg, and then yeah, I let my parents know that like I was considering this and I hadn't like made a decision, and this was still in the beginning of the academic year, and so I they made me finish that academic year like to completion, and then so I wasn't finished with the whole degree, and then I switched over like in my second year of my science degree, and so yeah, it definitely made me more grateful for like what I had, like going from something that like you loathe being in that environment and that situation every day, to something that you actually feel passionate about is like such a liberating feeling, like and that's like really kept me like grateful for like studying fashion like this whole time. Like all I got to do is think back to like how much I dreaded going in every day
Yeah.
when I
Well,
when I was studying fashion. I mean, studying science.
wow, that no, that is fantastic. And you brought up a really good point in terms of like coming from a more like Indian conservative family. Of course, white families can be conservative too, but they're definitely like, you know, the hangover apartheid and the way wealth has been distributed in the country. It's not as big a concern, obviously a generalization for white people. So when I was doing a commerce type degree and realized, you know, I can't do maths. I don't know what's going on. I just dipped straight away. I think it was coincidentally on the eve of a test. I was just like, I'm not going to do this anymore, and you know, I'm going to pursue my BA and be free spirited. So that, and I think it's sometimes crudely referred to as like black tax in academia in terms of the pressure that one's under from a home situation. But I'm very happy for the fashion world and for you especially that a compromise was met and that you were able to learn a lot of lessons along the way. I think it's a big lesson for everyone. And in moving away from fashion for a bit and back to school, because and everyone's like, oh, back to school, you're always talking about school. Well, we're only 23. It took up almost half of our lived experience. So I think it is a natural point of reflection. And obviously, being where you are now, I love that Frank Ocean letter that he wrote to himself, you know, 5-year future self. And if you had one for a young, like 15-year-old Gareth, what would that kind of be? I'd be very interested.
I think being at and I'm gonna attempt not to like to drag any institutions.
We were at Saks. We went to Saks, man. Everyone knows. It's good, it's bad, it's like any school.
But like I wouldn't want to. I try to give an objective perspective without like giving expressing your perspective without like actually going after like anyone in particular.
Mm, mm.
I feel like that there's too much of that in the conversations that are happening like recently. But yeah, I think as as a person of color in that situation, and especially like having come from a small like private school previously, like my main goal was assimilation. I did whatever like I had to do to fit in that environment. And like, yeah, I think that has created so much of like a lasting like doubt in my mind, or just like it has created like lasting effects in the sense that like I would have preferred to have like a little bit more like pride in me and myself, you know.
Mm.
And
So what are you saying to your younger self? What would you say to your younger self then? Is there a particular?
that like the assimilation isn't necessary, you know.
Mm.
it'll it'll work out. You'll find like people that like accept, we can like they can accept you without that sort of assimilation, you know, and forcing yourself to like to compromise on certain things.
Mm.
I think, you know, it's you can't talk about these institutions without talking about like without those kind of issues. I saw something quite interesting recently that like, you know, like for a person of color to like bring traditional food into those like environments for like, you know, for lunch,
Mm.
it's like it's unheard of. You know, you have to like, even though you eat these things like on the regular at home, you know, for like lunch, supper, like for like traditional meals, whatever, but to like bring like Indian food like to like something that's like foreign and unknown to school is just like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's not something that's done very often.
Or conversely, when it is brought, it's made like such a big deal about. You know, I found that, um, you know, it was only really accepted in terms of like a Muslim. How do I phrase this correctly? Um, Jesus, Samuel, I'm gonna have to edit this part. Otherwise, he's a racist. No, in terms of like a certain like a Muslim cuisine, you know, it was like, oh, you know, it's this was a big day now, and that's weird. It's like this is a normal delicacy. And when I was reading all these, and I love what you've said about assimilation, and I think it's a like again for a white person, it's not something I think about for a second. The only time I can ever recall having or thinking that I need to assimilate is at UCT studying a BA, and you go into a tutor group and you're the only white person there, and you go, oh, I wonder what I should say, and oh, am I talking too much, and what do I look like? Do I look like a fool? And I think for the first time I was like, oh my God, this is what a person of color experiences every time they're in a white space, and white spaces, especially in the nicer parts of Cape Town, are prevalent and massive. So hopefully with this conversation and this discourse around it, change can come about, and I'm hoping it will. But it also reminded me of a situation at school when all these stories were coming around that you went through, and I suppose as a result I was part of it. But that was at the time you were dating this girl. I mean, her name was Beep, you know, and you had dated her for 6 months or something. And I remember the one day you were like, Sam, you know, I'm dating this black girl. And I was like, oh, that's great. When did you guys start dating? You're like, oh, we've been dating for like 6 months. And I was like, what the hell? You know, I was like, Gareth, how can you be ashamed of this? This is your girlfriend. And without even thinking that this was the white structure and, you know, people putting that pressure. It wasn't, you weren't ashamed that you were dating this wonderful girl. You were ashamed of how people would react. So how do you feel looking back on that situation now?
I think, yeah, like looking back, and once you're like able to unpack it and like understand like what the underlying factors were, I think it was definitely twofold in the sense that she was like a family friend, girlfriend that like lived in Durban. So it was kind of like the situation is like, I got a girlfriend, and it's like, who is she? She's like, no, she goes to another school. You know, it's a little bit of that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
situation as well.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I I only like recently being since we left school, realized that like that I had essentially like internalized all the systemic racism and the snide comments and the issues that really plague these type of school under the guise of like locker room banter.
mm,
I just internalized all of these all of these issues to the point like I was ashamed to like to mention it. Being a person of color, like, and it's so bizarre to like even say these words out loud, you know,
Yeah.
to actually like articulate this, and like, and that you know, that this, like, through, like, in my head, like this kind of thinking was conditioned over and over and over.
Sure.
And yeah, I think it speaks volumes. It really does.
It's a discourse that's come to the forefront, and I think it's very good that it has. Well, obviously, it's good that it has, but that it's almost encapsulated the plight of black women in these schooling systems, because, like you said there, you've almost internalized racism, and I'm not calling you out for it. Geez, I was more part of that system than one could ever believe, but it's and then these poor voices become completely marginalized, not only by the white spaces, but by now male people of color. So it's just it's too terrible. So hopefully intersectional change comes from this, and I think that is the buzzword. But before we wrap up and go back to our corona lives, I wanted to just, because I also feel, and I'm not defending these schools whatsoever. I mean, I still work and coach at Sax, and I love Sax, and I hope that I'm actively being part of the change that people want to see in these schools, and people need at these schools. But there were good times as well, of course. And one of my favorite moments with you
And
at
so, sorry to interrupt you there.
yeah.
I just wanted to say, and like something I wanted to include earlier on is that, like, coming from a small school in like Tableview, you know, I came to this massive like institution that was Sax, and like, although I experienced these things, I experienced like systemic racism on like multiple fronts. I'm still like crazy grateful for like the facilities and the environment that I was at. You know, like having, like, every school has problems, and you know, and a lot of them are going to be like, you know, the legacy of apartheid. So it's, you can't run away from these issues. It like plagues us all. But like I was really like amazed and still like in awe of what Sax is, like, compared to, like, you know, where I came from. It's really that perspective, you know.
Sure. I agree with you saying. I mean, institutions are made up of people, and it reflects what society is like. And people, institutions are multifaceted. I think that's one of the biggest problems with cancel culture. And I'm not saying that the views and everything shared on racism in schools is wrong. No, these stories have to be aired and discussed, and change has to come from them. But yeah, like I said, institutions are multifaceted. They will be horrendous incidents, and there will be fantastic incidents. I mean, our friendship was born at Sax, all of that sort of stuff. And my favorite aspect, whilst trying to move off to something a bit lighter, was, I don't know if you recall, it was probably about grade 9 or grade 10, and vaping had just become like new in South Africa, biggish in South Africa. Not what it is like now, where people are walking around with external hard drives and blowing
It
out.
was still a niche, you know.
There we go, exactly. And we thought we were like really rebellious and cool. And it's one of my favorite memories of school, is when we went down to like the Cavendish Square area, and it was actually, you went into the
Uniform, mind you.
in school uniform. That we were wild, but no, you were wilder than I was, because you went to buy the vape whilst I hid in the toilets in McDonald's. So and then I came out, and I was just thinking about it the other day, because you're reading all these articles about, is smoking good or bad, and Dlamini Zuma is doing her thing in regards to the coronavirus. And I was just thinking, oh, did I take years off my life with those 30 minutes of vaping I did in grade 10? And it was just one of my favorite stories with you, and I think you had forgotten it, so I just wanted to bring it up
No,
again.
dude. Like, my most vivid memory of the whole situation is your reaction to all of this. You know, you running with the with a reckless, you know, like hiding in the bathroom. Honestly, we inflamed, we expanded, like our egos were a little bit big for, like, you know, false out at that point to think that people even cared about what we were doing.
Yeah,
But
golly.
then I could just see the mental like conflict you were going through in your head. It's like, do I want to do this?
Mm.
Let's go through it for the thrill. And then once you get it, you're like, oh, I actually don't like this thing. And then yeah, I'm pretty sure you sold it to a friend of ours within a couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, it was also the pressure of vaping in your room because everyone's like, oh, yeah, it smells like deodorant. But like, your mom would come in and she's like, you're a prepubescent boy. You're like, ah! She's, it was too terrible. And yeah, the vape mob, vape niche, what a crazy time. I'm sorry, I can't look at anyone now without a scathing judgment. It's who I am. I'm flawed, but
You were once one of them, man.
yeah, but I mean, people were once Nazis. So, ooh, no, I mean, no, let's not get into that. Let's move away. Let's move away quickly. This is what happens when we have interludes, when the alarm goes off. My mind wanders. Um, but before we sign off, what's up? What's next up for you? Where you going? I mean, I like how you are imbued with this sort of positive outlook on life. I love it. I love people with it. So, what are the next couple of months, years looking like for you in the fashion game?
So I'm graduating this year, and I went directly from UCT into fashion. So I think it's been like 5 years of like studying up until now. So I think I just a little break is on the books. I'd definitely like to get involved in some sort of apprenticeships because obviously like what I've learned in terms of like physically like making things is really just scratch the surface, and so I'd like to like develop that a bit more, be a bit more proficient with my hands, and maybe get into my own like small kind of business of I've been starting to look into we've been starting to look into a sustainable form of fashion.
That's
And
uncouth. Uncouth drop in this fall. I also don't like how you say maybe you're getting into a business. I thought we were doing this.
no, I thought I was meant to be like subtle about it. That's what I was trying to do.
This is
I
the
was trying to
first.
be mysterious.
This is the first time uncouth has been mentioned, and it's a maybe. Oh God, I don't even think I want to be involved anymore.
No, I gotta keep the energy, man.
Keep the energy. Okay, so a bit of reflection, a bit of work, a bit of challenge. So that's all good. I'm very excited for where we do go and watching you grow. But I think that's all we can do for today. So thanks for coming on, G. It's always such a pleasure to chat to you. So, and like I said, it's now part of our personal historical archive, irrespective of whether our moms are the only ones who watch or listen to this. So yeah, thanks very much for coming on. I really appreciate your time and your wonderful insights.
No. It's always good to chat to you. Thanks for having me for my debut on Kizzy Toast. Huh?
Oh yeah, and before I actually sign off, I've told some people this, but Kids Eat Toast sometimes is Gareth's doing. He is the genius behind the name. So there we go. Thanks, G. That's it. If you've made it to the end of the podcast, congratulations. Thank you so much. I don't think I've ever finished a Joe Rogan podcast in my life. So who am I to have a completed podcast either? So thanks for listening. We'll have tons of other videos and guests coming up very shortly. So thanks for your support, your comments, all that sort of stuff. Till next time, goodbye. Oh, wait, signature sign off. I'm trying to make that my new thing. Thanks, bye.